The Rediscovery. A story of adventure and belonging. Chapter 1. The Man Who Came Back to Life. I first met James Hartley on a drizzly Tuesday morning at the Wanderers Guild in Edinburgh, where I worked as a trip coordinator for adventure tours. He stood at the counter with the uncertain posture of someone who wasn't quite sure he belonged there. Shoulders slightly hunched, one hand gripping a worn leather notebook, the other fidgeting with his wedding ring. At 67, he had the distinguished grey temples and weathered face of someone who'd lived a full life. But his eyes held something I'd seen before in others his age. A quiet desperation, as if he was searching for something he'd lost long ago. "I'd like to book a trek," he said, his voice carrying the soft burr of someone who'd spent decades in the Highlands. Something challenging. The Cairngorms, perhaps. Or farther afield. I glanced at his intake form. Retired civil engineer. Last adventure experience. 32 years ago. Emergency contact. Catherine Hartley, wife. "It's been a while since you've been out there," I said gently, not wanting to discourage him. "We have some excellent introductory hikes that might." "I know what I'm capable of," he interrupted, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry. That was rude. It's just. I used to be quite the adventurer, back before life got in the way. I climbed in the Alps, trekked through Nepal, dove off the Australian coast. Then marriage, children, career. All wonderful things, mind you. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself in the routine." He pulled out a faded photograph from his notebook. A younger version of himself standing atop a mountain peak. Arms spread wide. Face split by an enormous grin. The contrast between that vibrant young man and the subdued person before me was striking. "My grandson found this in my attic last month," James continued. He asked me, "Granddad, who's this?" As if I were a completely different person. And I realized. I have been. For 3 decades. That's when I knew he wasn't just another retiree looking to tick off a bucket list item. James Hartley was a man trying to find his way back to himself. "My youngest daughter just moved to Australia for work," he explained. "Empty nest syndrome, they call it. Though the nest has been empty for years. But this felt different. Catherine, my wife. She suggested I pick up my old hobbies. She's been extraordinarily patient with my moping about." I studied him more carefully then. Despite his age, he stood straight-backed when he forgot to be uncertain. His handshake had been firm, his eyes clear. There was strength there, buried under years of office work and domestic routine. "Tell you what," I said. "Let's start with a week-long expedition to the Art of Sky. Coastal hiking, some basic rock climbing, wild camping. If you handle that well, we'll talk about something more ambitious." His face transformed. That grin from the photograph flickered across his features, 30 years younger for just a moment. "When do we leave?" As it turned out, "we" was literal. Our regular guide had fallen ill, and I found myself assigned to lead the expedition. At 32, I'd been guiding for nearly a decade, but I approached this trip with unusual caution. James wasn't the oldest client I'd ever had. But there was something about him. A mixture of enthusiasm and fragility. That made me feel responsible for more than just his physical safety. The morning we set off, Catherine came to see him off. She was a small woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. She hugged James tightly, then held him at arm's length. "Don't do anything I wouldn't do," she said with a smile, but I caught the worry beneath it. "That leaves me quite a lot of latitude," James teased. Then, more seriously, "I'll be careful. I promise. I know you will. You always are." She turned to me. "Take care of him, won't you? He's precious cargo." "I will." I promised, and meant it. As we drove north toward Skye, James was quiet, staring out the window at the passing landscape. The heather-covered hills rolled by. purple and gold in the autumn light. Finally, he spoke. I'm terrified, you know. What if I can't do it? What if I've left it too late? Then we'll know, I said, and you'll have tried. That's more than most people do. He nodded slowly, turning back to the window. Yes. I suppose you're right. But I could see his reflection in the glass, and the doubt in his eyes made me wonder if this expedition was such a good idea after all. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. I had no idea how wrong I would be. Chapter 2. The First Steps. The Isle of Skye greeted us with its typical temperament. Equal parts magnificent and menacing. Grey clouds hung low over the Black Coolins, and a sharp wind cut across Loch Corroisk as we began our trek. James struggled with his pack at first, adjusting and readjusting the straps with the fussiness of someone who'd forgotten the particulars of weight distribution. Here, I said, helping him cinch the hip belt properly. Let your hips carry most of the weight, not your shoulders. I remember now, he said, a bit sheepishly. Muscle memory apparently needs reminding. But as we walked, something remarkable happened. With each mile, James seemed to shed years. His stride lengthened, his breathing found its rhythm, and that uncertain stoop began to straighten. By the time we stopped for lunch at a rocky outcrop overlooking the sea, he was grinning again. That same grin from the photograph. God, I've missed this, he said, biting into a sandwich. The ache in your legs, the wind in your face, the smell of the earth. How did I go so long without it? Life has a way of distracting us, I offered. It does indeed. He gazed out at the churning grey water. I used to bring Catherine hiking, before the children came. She loved it then. But after Katie was born, then Michael, then Natalie. Well, it became easier to holiday at the seaside, somewhere with hotels and restaurants. Easier, but less alive. Does she mind? You being here now, I mean. James considered this. Catherine is a remarkable woman. She knew I'd been diminishing, bit by bit, like a candle burning down. She told me I needed to do this. For myself, yes, but also for us. I don't want to spend my retirement with the ghost of the man I married, she said. That evening, as we set up camp in a sheltered glen, James proved he hadn't forgotten everything. His hands moved with increasing confidence as he assembled his tent. Though I noticed him pause occasionally, working through forgotten steps with patient determination. He struggled briefly with the rain fly, got it backwards, laughed at himself, and corrected it. Like riding a bicycle, he muttered. We cooked dinner over a camp stove. Nothing fancy, just dehydrated curry and rice. But James ate with the appreciation of someone at a 5-star restaurant. You know what I don't miss? He said between bites. The discomfort. My back is already complaining, and I suspect tomorrow morning will be quite the adventure just getting out of my sleeping bag. It gets easier, I assured him. Does it? Or do you just get better at ignoring the pain? Bit of both, probably. As darkness fell, we sat by our small fire. Wild camping regulations permitting. And James told me stories of his earlier adventures. There was the time he got lost in the Swiss Alps and navigated by stars. The diving trip where he encountered a whale shark the size of a bus. The trek through Torres del Paine, where he weathered a 3-day storm in a tent barely bigger than a coffin. I was fearless then, he said quietly. Or maybe just stupid. Now I know how much there is to lose. Like what? Catherine. My children. My grandson. He's 6 now, bright as a button. I think about them constantly. What would happen to them if something went wrong out here? That's not stupidity, I said. That's love. It makes you careful, not weak. He looked at me thoughtfully. You're wise beyond your years, you know that? I laughed. I've just spent a lot of time watching people face their fears. You learn things. The next day brought rain, and with it, a test of James's resolve. The trail became treacherous with mud and loose rock. We were traversing a steep hillside when James's foot slipped. He went down hard on one knee, crying out in pain and surprise. I was at his side immediately. "Are you hurt?" He sat for a moment, breathing hard, then carefully tested his knee. "Just bruised, I think. And my pride is wounded." Pride heals faster than bones. Barely. But he was smiling again. With my help, he got to his feet, tested his weight on the leg, and nodded. "Still functional. Let's carry on." I watched him carefully for the rest of the day, but James pushed through with a determination that impressed me. He didn't complain, didn't ask to turn back. When we finally reached our campsite, a breathtaking plateau overlooking the sea, he sank onto a rock with a groan that turned into a laugh. "I'm alive," he said, wonder in his voice. "My knee hurts, my back aches, my feet are probably developing blisters, and I cannot remember the last time I felt this alive." That night, he called Catherine on the satellite phone. "Yes, darling, I'm fine. A bit battered, but fine. No, I didn't break anything. Just a small slip." "Catherine, love, I can hear you worrying from here. I'm being careful, I promise." "Yes, the guide is excellent. Very patient with this old fool. I miss you too. Give my love to everyone." After he hung up, he sat quietly for a long time, staring at the phone. "Second thoughts?" I asked. "No," he said slowly. "The opposite, actually. I'm wondering why I waited so long. All these years I could have been doing this. Bringing the family along, even if it was just day hikes. Showing my children this." He gestured at the landscape before us. The sea reflecting the last light of day, the mountains dark against the sky, everything vast and wild and beautiful. "Maybe your grandson will want to trek with you someday," I suggested. James's face lit up at the thought. "Do you know, I think he might. He's adventurous, that one. Always climbing things, exploring. His mother worries herself sick, but I recognize that spirit. It was mine, once. It still is," I said. "You're here, aren't you?" He looked at me, something shifting in his expression. "Yes. I suppose I am." Chapter 3. The Deep Places. After Sky, James returned home for 3 weeks, but I received regular emails. His knee had healed well. He'd been walking every day, building his endurance. Catherine had started joining him on shorter hikes, and they'd rediscovered conversation. Real conversation. In a way they hadn't experienced in years. "She told me I'm more present now," he wrote. "More myself. It made me realize how absent I've been, living in my own head, going through motions. I want to keep this feeling, this aliveness." What's next? What came next was meant to be a caving expedition in the Yorkshire Dales. Nothing too extreme, just a series of well-mapped limestone caves with some basic scrambling and one short squeeze. But James had other ideas. "I've been reading about the sea caves on the Scottish coast," he said when he arrived for our second trip. "Coastal exploration by kayak. Would that be possible?" I hesitated. Kayaking required different skills, and sea caves could be unpredictable with tides and swells. But James had proven himself capable, and something in his enthusiasm was infectious. "It's November," I pointed out. "The water will be cold, the weather unreliable." "I know. That's part of the appeal, isn't it? The rawness of it." We spent 2 days training at a reservoir. Basic paddle strokes, wet exits, self-rescue techniques. James approached it with the methodical precision of an engineer, breaking down each movement, practicing until it became fluid. His determination was remarkable, but so was his humility. When he struggled with a technique, he asked questions, listened carefully, tried again. "You're a natural teacher," he told me after successfully completing a wet exit and re-entry drill. Patient, clear. Do you enjoy it? Most days, I admitted. Though I worry sometimes that I'm just helping people tick boxes rather than truly experience things. Is that what you think I'm doing? Ticking boxes? No, I said honestly. You're different. You're searching for something. And have I found it, do you think? I watched him floating in his kayak, grey hair plastered to his head, face ruddy with cold and exertion, grinning like a madman. I think you're getting closer. The day we launched for the sea caves, the weather was moody but workable. Overcast skies, moderate swell, wind from the west. We put in at a small beach near Oban, and paddled north along a dramatic coastline of dark cliffs and hidden inlets. James had improved remarkably over 2 days of practice. His paddle strokes were efficient if not elegant, and he read the water with increasing confidence. But I stayed close, always aware that the sea was unforgiving of mistakes. There, I pointed to a dark opening in the cliff face. That's our first cave. We'll go in slowly, let our eyes adjust to the darkness. Inside, the world transformed. Our voices echoed off unseen walls. Water dripped and splashed in the darkness. As we paddled deeper, I switched on my headlamp, and the beam revealed a cathedral of stone. Arched ceilings, carved smooth by millennia of waves, glittering with minerals and moisture. My God, James breathed, his voice full of awe. It's like being inside the Earth's memory. We explored for an hour, navigating through interconnected chambers, finding passages that opened to hidden pools where light filtered down from cracks above. James was reverent, speaking in whispers, occasionally just floating in silence, absorbing the experience. In one chamber, he stopped paddling entirely and just sat, head tilted back, staring at the ceiling where phosphorescent algae created a constellation of pale green stars. Catherine would love this, he said quietly. She used to paint, before the children. Watercolors, mostly. Landscapes and seascapes. She was quite good. But she stopped when life got busy, just like I stopped adventuring. Does she still have her paints? In a cupboard somewhere, I imagine. Forgotten, like so many parts of ourselves. He was quiet for a moment. You know what terrifies me most? Not death, not getting hurt out here. It's the thought that I might have lived my entire life never remembering who I truly was. That I might have died having forgotten how to be fully alive. Before I could respond, the tide shifted. I felt it first in the way the water moved, a subtle change in current and pressure. Then I heard it. The sound of the swell building outside the cave entrance. We need to move, I said, keeping my voice calm but urgent. Now. James heard the change in my tone and immediately started paddling. Good. No panic, just response. But as we approached the entrance, a larger wave surged into the cave, filling the narrow opening with churning white water. Hold position. I called. Let it pass, then we go. We waited, riding the surge as it pushed us back, then forward again. The moment the wave retreated, I pointed. Now. Paddle hard. We shot forward through the entrance just as another wave arrived. It caught James's stern and spun him sideways. For a terrifying moment, I thought he'd capsize. But he leaned into the turn, used the momentum to straighten out, and powered through to calmer water beyond. Once we were safely clear, I paddled alongside him. He was breathing hard, eyes wide, but his grip on the paddle was steady. That was. He started, then laughed breathlessly. That was extraordinary. Terrifying, but extraordinary. You handled it perfectly. Textbook response. I was trained by the best. He paused, catching his breath. You know what I realized in there, when that wave hit? I wasn't thinking about Catherine or my children or what would happen if I died. I was just present. Completely in the moment. No past, no future, just now. That's what adventure does, I said. It demands your full presence. Yes. He looked back at the cave entrance, then out at the open sea beyond. That's exactly what I've been missing. I've been living in my head for 30 years. Worrying about the future, regretting the past, never fully inhabiting the present moment. We explored 2 more caves that day, though with more caution and better timing with the tides. In the last cave, we found something unexpected. A seal colony hauled out on rocks in a chamber at the back. They watched us with curious dark eyes, barking occasionally, and completely unconcerned by our presence. James was enchanted. He sat in his kayak, perfectly still, just watching them. A pup swam close, circling us curiously before rejoining its mother. "They're so present," James whispered. "They're not worried about tomorrow or yesterday. They're just here." That evening, camped on a beach with a fire crackling before us, James was quieter than usual. He kept pulling out his phone, looking at photos of his family, then putting it away again. "Missing them?" I asked. "Yes and no," he said thoughtfully. "I'm missing them as people I love. But I'm not missing the life we've been living. This half-asleep routine we've fallen into. I want to go back different. I want to bring this presence back with me. They might not understand right away. I know. But Catherine will. She's always understood me, even when I didn't understand myself." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I want to take them places. Not package holidays or city breaks. Real places. Wild places. I want my grandson to see a seal pup up close, to feel the thrill of a wave catching his kayak, to know what it's like to be fully, completely alive. You could become a guide yourself," I suggested. "Share this with others." James looked at me, surprised, then thoughtful. "I'm 67 years old. So, I've trained guides in their 70s. Truly? Truly. Experience matters more than age in this work. And you have something special. You remember what it's like to lose this, then find it again. That's valuable." He sat with this idea for a long while, watching the fire. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. First, though, I want to do more. See more. There's so much world I haven't touched in 3 decades. What did you have in mind?" He pulled out his worn leather notebook, opened it to a page covered in his neat engineer's handwriting. It was a list. Costa Rica rainforest. Norway fjords. Scottish Highlands winter expedition. Australian Great Barrier Reef. New Zealand mountains. "Ambitious," I said. "I'm making up for lost time." He smiled, but there was something wistful in it. And I'm very aware that time is the one resource I can't engineer my way into having more of. Chapter 4. The Green Heart. 3 months later, we were in Costa Rica. I'd initially questioned the wisdom of such a dramatic change in environment, but James had been insistent. He'd trained relentlessly, joined a gym for the first time in his life, worked with a physical therapist to strengthen his knee. More importantly, Catherine had given her blessing. More than that, she'd started planning her own adventure. She's going to Morocco with her sister. James told me on the flight over, pride evident in his voice. Hasn't seen Judith in 2 years, and they're going to spend a week in Marrakesh, just the 2 of them. She's excited. I haven't seen her this excited in years. The plan was to trek through Corcovado National Park, camp in the rainforest, and learn basic jungle survival skills. It was a far cry from the Scottish caves, and I watched James carefully in those first days, looking for signs of struggle or regret. But if anything, he thrived. The heat and humidity that left many visitors exhausted seemed to energize him. The cacophony of the jungle. Howler monkeys roaring at dawn, toucans calling, insects humming. Delighted rather than disturbed him. He approached each new challenge with the same methodical determination he'd shown in Scotland. When a venomous fer-de-lance snake crossed our path, James didn't panic. He simply stopped, observed from a safe distance, and waited for it to move on. "Beautiful creature," he remarked once it had disappeared into the undergrowth. "Deadly, but beautiful. Not everyone would see it that way. I've learned something these past months, he said as we continued walking. Everything dangerous isn't necessarily a threat. Risk and threat aren't the same thing. The sea cave was risky, but it was only a threat because we misjudged the tide. That snake was neither. It was just a snake, going about its business. On our third day in the jungle, we witnessed something remarkable. Following the sound of movement through the canopy, we came upon a family of spider monkeys feeding in a fig tree. But it wasn't just the monkeys. The tree was alive with creatures. Scarlet macaws squabbled over fruit. A sloth hung motionless on a lower branch. Green iguanas basked in patches of sunlight. Even the tree itself was covered in orchids, bromeliads, and vines, each hosting its own micro-ecosystem. James stood transfixed for nearly an hour, barely moving, just watching this explosion of life. I noticed tears on his cheeks. Everything is connected, he said quietly. Look at it. Every creature depending on every other creature, the tree supporting hundreds of species, all of it interconnected. It's like... He struggled for words. It's like a family. A massive, complicated, beautiful family. That night, lying in our hammocks under mosquito nets, listening to the jungle's nighttime chorus, James talked about his own family with a tenderness I hadn't heard before. Michael. My middle child. We haven't spoken properly in 2 years, he admitted. We had a falling out over something so trivial I can barely remember what it was. Pride on both sides, I suppose. But seeing that tree today, all those interconnections, it made me realize how much time I've wasted on stupid grievances. Will you reach out to him? I'll try. I can't guarantee he'll respond, but I have to try. He paused. You know what's strange? This trip wasn't supposed to be about my family. I thought I was escaping them, rediscovering myself separately from my role as husband and father. But instead, I'm understanding them differently. Understanding how I fit with them, how we're all connected. Like the fig tree. Exactly like the fig tree. The next challenge came on day 5, when we reached a river that needed crossing. The bridge marked on our map had been washed away, leaving us with 2 options. Backtrack for an entire day, or ford the river. The water was fast but not deep. Perhaps chest high at the center. I went first, testing the current and the footing, finding a route across. When I reached the far bank, I called back to James. It's doable, but you need to be careful. The rocks are slippery, and the current is stronger than it looks. James studied the water for a long moment, working through the problem. Then he began. He moved methodically, testing each step, using his walking stick for balance, angling his body against the current. Halfway across, his foot slipped and he staggered, catching himself on his stick. You okay? I called. Fine, he shouted back. Just remembering why I became an engineer instead of a tightrope walker. He made it across without further incident, emerging dripping but triumphant. You know what I was thinking the whole time? He said, wringing out his shirt. That if I fell and broke something, Catherine would kill me. Then I thought. I'm doing this, for Catherine. For both of us. To remember how to be alive, so I can teach that to our family. Quite philosophical for a river crossing. One does think clearly when facing the possibility of being swept away by rapids. That evening, we made camp in a clearing where the forest opened to the sky, giving us our first clear view of stars since entering the jungle. James was animated, more talkative than usual, processing everything we'd seen and done. Do you know what I've realized? He said as we ate dinner. I spent 30 years building things. Bridges, roads, buildings. Engineering solutions to problems. But I was engineering my life the same way, trying to eliminate risk, control variables, minimize uncertainty. And in doing so, I engineered out all the parts that make life worth living. Adventure, you mean? More than that. Uncertainty. Mystery. The possibility of surprise. I made my life so safe and predictable that it became a kind of death. He looked at me intently. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. I see it all the time. People coming on these trips trying to remember how to feel uncertain, how to not know what comes next. Yes. Exactly. He was excited now, speaking quickly. We're so addicted to control, to knowing, to having everything planned and scheduled. But life isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be lived. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the jungle's night sounds. Then James spoke again, more softly. I called Catherine this afternoon, while you were filtering water. Told her about the monkey tree. She cried. He smiled at the memory. Happy tears, she said. She told me I sound like the man she fell in love with 43 years ago. The one who proposed to her on top of a mountain in Wales, in the pouring rain, because he couldn't wait for better weather. That's quite romantic. It was terribly impractical. We were both soaked, freezing, and I dropped the ring twice. But it was perfect. He looked up at the stars. I'd forgotten that version of myself. The one who did things just because they felt right, not because they were sensible or appropriate or properly planned. You found him again. I'm finding him. Still a work in progress. He glanced at me. Thank you, by the way, for your patience with this old fool rediscovering himself. You're not a fool, I said firmly. You're brave. It takes more courage to admit you've lost yourself than to pretend everything is fine. James nodded slowly. I suppose it does. Our last full day in the rainforest brought the trip's greatest gift. We'd risen before dawn to reach a canopy platform by sunrise, hoping to witness the jungle's awakening from above. The climb up the observation tower was challenging. 50 meters of ladders and platforms bolted to a massive strangler fig. But James made it without complaint, though his breathing was labored at the top. What we witnessed was transcendent. As the sun rose, the jungle came alive in layers. First the birds. Macaws, parrots, toucans exploding from the canopy in a riot of color and sound. Then the monkeys. 3 different species moving through the trees, calling to each other across the green expanse. Spider webs became visible, strung between trees like gossamer highways. Mist rose from the forest floor, shot through with golden light. James wept openly. I'd forgotten, he said through his tears. I'd forgotten how beautiful the world is. How full of wonder. I've been sleepwalking for 30 years through paradise, too busy or too numb to notice. He pulled out his phone and took photos, then put it away. No, he said. Photos won't capture this. I need to just be here. Fully here. So we sat in silence as the jungle awakened around us, and I watched James Hartley fall in love with the world again. Chapter 5. Winter's Lesson. I didn't hear from James for 2 months after Costa Rica. I wondered if the adventure had satisfied him, if he'd returned to his comfortable retired life with memories to sustain him. But then, in late January, an email arrived. I've done something mad, it read. I've enrolled in a guide training course. 6 months, practical and theoretical. I want to do this properly. And I've reconciled with Michael. We had dinner, talked for hours, and I apologized for being an absent father for so long. He forgave me. We're going hiking together next month, just the 2 of us. Also, I've convinced Catherine to join us for the Scotland winter expedition. She's nervous but excited. We start training next week. Are you still willing to guide? The Scotland winter expedition had been his idea from the start. A week-long trek through the Highlands in February, the most challenging environment Britain could offer. I'd been skeptical initially, but James had proven himself capable time and again. Having Catherine join us changed the dynamic entirely. I'd be responsible not just for James's rediscovery, but for his wife's introduction to this world he'd reclaimed. No pressure. They arrived in Aviemore on a grey February morning, Catherine bundled in new outdoor gear that still had the tags attached. She was smaller than I remembered, more fragile looking, and I felt a flash of concern. But when she smiled at James, there was steel in her eyes. "If this old goat can do it, I can do it," she said, squeezing his hand. Though I reserve the right to complain frequently and loudly. "I'd expect nothing less," James replied, kissing her forehead. Watching them together, I saw something I hadn't seen in Costa Rica. A partnership of equals, each supporting the other, each delighted by the other's presence. James had told me they'd been struggling before his adventures began, drifting apart in that comfortable but deadening way long marriages sometimes do. But this was different. This was a couple in love, choosing to be together in the wilderness. The first day was brutal. The highlands in winter are unforgiving. Bitter wind, frequent snow, temperatures well below freezing. We were attempting the Larigru, a high pass through the Cairngorms, camping in snow and hiking through some of Scotland's most dramatic terrain. Catherine struggled. The weight of her pack, the cold, the altitude. It all compounded. But she was determined, and James was patient in a way I hadn't seen before. He stayed by her side, adjusting his pace to hers, offering encouragement without being condescending. "You're doing brilliantly," he told her as we stopped for a break. "Better than I did on my first day in Skye." "Liar," she said fondly. "But I appreciate the sentiment." That night, setting up camp in the snow, I watched James with new appreciation. He'd transformed from uncertain client to competent adventurer. His movements were efficient, his decisions sound. More importantly, he'd learned to read people. He anticipated Catherine's needs, helped without hovering, celebrated her small victories. "First tent I've pitched in 40 years, Catherine said, stepping back from her work with satisfaction. "Not bad, if I say so myself." "Magnificent," James agreed. "Shall we have champagne? In the snow? Are you mad?" "Completely." He pulled a small flask from his pack. "Whiskey, actually. I thought we'd toast your first winter camp." They sat together in the gathering darkness, sharing the whiskey, and I heard Catherine laugh. A full, genuine laugh that echoed off the surrounding peaks. "Why did we stop doing this?" she asked James. "Why did we let life become so small?" "Fear, I think. We got scared. Of danger, of change, of anything that wasn't safe and predictable." "Well, this is terrifying," Catherine said. "My toes are numb, I'm fairly certain I'll never be warm again, and I suspect my back will never forgive me for sleeping on the ground." "But James?" "Yes, love. I feel more alive than I have in decades." The next day brought the expedition's greatest challenge. We were crossing a snow-filled corrie when the weather turned violent. Wind gusted to 60 miles per hour, snow reduced visibility to a few meters, and the temperature plummeted. I called a halt immediately. "We need to get to shelter," I shouted over the wind. "There's an emergency bothy half a kilometer east. Follow me closely." The journey to the bothy was harrowing. We roped together for safety, moving as a unit through the whiteout. Catherine was struggling badly, her smaller stature making her more vulnerable to the wind. James stayed beside her, one arm around her shoulders, physically shielding her from the worst of the blast. When we finally stumbled into the bothy, a tiny stone hut maintained for exactly these emergencies. We were all hypothermic. I got the emergency stove going immediately while James helped Catherine out of her wet outer layers, wrapping her in our emergency blanket. "I'm sorry," she said through chattering teeth. "I'm slowing you down." "You're doing no such thing," James said firmly. "We're a team. We move together or not at all." Once we were warm and had hot tea inside us, the storm's fury became something beautiful. An opportunity to be cozy and safe while nature raged outside. We spent the afternoon in that tiny hut, talking, laughing, telling stories. Catherine spoke of her paintings, how she'd stopped creating not because she'd lost the desire, but because she'd convinced herself she wasn't good enough. I'd forgotten that doing things for joy was reason enough, she said. I needed purpose, validation, outcome. But maybe the purpose is the joy itself. James took her hand. When I found that old photograph in the attic, I didn't just see who I used to be. I saw what I'd lost. Not just adventure, but the ability to do things simply because they made me feel alive. That's what I've been trying to find again. And have you? Catherine asked softly. Yes. But I found something else too. He looked at her with such tenderness that I felt I should look away. I've found that it means nothing if I can't share it with you. All those trips, all those adventures. They were wonderful, but they were incomplete. Because you weren't there. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. I've been afraid, you know. Afraid that you discovered you were happier out here, away from me. Away from our ordinary life. Oh, Catherine. James pulled her close. There is nothing ordinary about our life. I just forgot how extraordinary it was. How extraordinary you are. The storm raged for 2 days. We spent that time in the cramped bothy, rationing our food, keeping warm, and talking about everything and nothing. I learned more about the Hartleys in those 48 hours than I had in all our previous time together. They'd met at university. James studying engineering, Catherine studying art history. Their first date had been a disaster, a formal dinner where they'd both been miserably uncomfortable. Their second date had been a hike up Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, where they'd talked for 6 hours straight and watched the sunset over the city. I knew then I'd marry her, James said. She was the only person I'd ever met who could keep up with my mind and challenge my assumptions all at once. I knew I'd marry him, because he was the first person who'd ever asked about my dreams instead of my plans, Catherine added. He wanted to know what made my soul sing, not what I was going to do with my degree. They'd had a good marriage, they both agreed. But somewhere along the way, they'd stopped being partners in adventure and become partners in routine. They'd raised 3 children, built careers, maintained a home. All important, all valuable. But they'd forgotten to maintain themselves as individuals and as a couple. I think we assumed we had time, Catherine said. Time to rediscover each other later, after the children were grown, after retirement. But time has a way of slipping past, and suddenly you look at the person across the breakfast table and realize you've been living parallel lives instead of an intertwined one. Is that why you encouraged him to do this? I asked. To go on these trips? Partly. But also because I could see him dying slowly, bit by bit. The light in his eyes was going out. I loved him too much to watch that happen. James squeezed her hand. And now I'm dragging you into the wilderness, nearly getting you killed in blizzards. You're not dragging me anywhere, Catherine said firmly. I chose this. And yes, it's terrifying and uncomfortable, and I suspect I'll be sore for weeks. But I understand now why you needed it. Because I need it too. When the storm finally broke, we emerged into a transformed landscape. Everything was white, pristine, glittering under a clear blue sky. The mountains looked like they'd been carved from crystal, and the silence was profound. That special quality of quiet that only comes after a storm. We stood together outside the bothy, 3 tiny figures in an immense landscape, and I watched as James and Catherine held each other, just breathing in the beauty of it all. Thank you, Catherine said to me later as we began our trek out. For taking care of us. For being patient with 2 old fools remembering how to live. You're not fools, I said. You're some of the bravest people I've ever guided. Brave or stupid? James asked with a grin. There's a thin line between the two, I admitted. But I think you're on the right side of it. The journey back to Aviemore took 3 days instead of the planned 2. We were moving slowly, savoring the experience rather than rushing through it. On our last night, camped in a glen with the aurora borealis dancing overhead, Catherine spoke of her plans. I'm going to start painting again, she announced. Not for gallery shows or validation or anything like that. Just for the joy of it. I want to paint this. The mountains, the light, the way the snow catches the aurora. You should paint in the field, James suggested. Plein air, they call it. We could do painting expeditions together. Outdoor painting in Scottish weather. That's ambitious. Says the woman who just survived a Highland blizzard in a bothy. Catherine laughed. Fair point. Although I might start with something a bit warmer. Maybe we could try painting in Provence? Or Tuscany? Wherever you want to go, James said. I've spent these months rediscovering adventure. I want to spend the next months rediscovering it with you. They looked at each other in the shimmering light of the aurora, and I saw a couple who had found their way back to each other through the wilderness. Literally and metaphorically. What about your guide training? I asked James. Still planning to go through with it? Absolutely. But I've been thinking about it differently. I don't want to guide strangers, necessarily. I want to guide people like me. People who've forgotten how to live, who need to remember what it feels like to be fully present in the world. People who've lost themselves in routine and responsibility. That's a good niche, I said. And I want Catherine to be part of it. Not just along for the ride, but co-leading. Her perspective on rediscovery is just as valuable as mine. Maybe more so, because she's doing it in real time. Catherine looked surprised. You want me to be a guide? I want us to do this together. Everything, together. The way we used to before life got in the way. She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'd like that. Though we should start with some easier trips before I attempt to guide anyone through a Highland winter. Agreed. Maybe the Lake District in spring? Work our way up. The Lake District in spring sounds perfect. As I watched them planning their future together, animated and excited, I realized that James's journey had come full circle. He'd set out to rediscover himself, and in doing so, he'd rediscovered his marriage, his family, and his place in the world. The adventure wasn't the destination. It was the catalyst for transformation. Chapter 6. The Greatest Discovery. I thought that would be the end of my time with the Hartleys. They'd found what they were looking for, and my role in their story was complete. But 3 months later, James called with an unusual request. I need your help with something, he said. It's a bit unconventional. I'm listening. I want to take my whole family on an expedition. All 3 children, their partners, my grandson. A week in the Highlands, nothing too extreme, but real wilderness camping. A chance for all of us to connect away from screens and schedules and the noise of modern life. That's ambitious. Multi-generational trips can be challenging. I know. But I think it's important. I've spent these months reconnecting with Catherine, and it's been transformative. But I've also realized how disconnected I am from my children's lives. I want to change that. I want us to be a family, not just people who see each other at Christmas. What do Catherine and your children think about this? Catherine thinks it's a wonderful idea. She's been working on them, one by one. Michael's keen. We've done a few day hikes together since our reconciliation, and he's caught the bug. Katie's hesitant but willing. Natalie. He paused. Natalie is the challenge. She thinks I'm having some sort of crisis, that this is all a phase I'll grow out of. Is it? No. His voice was firm. This isn't a phase. This is me remembering who I am. And I want to share that with my children before it's too late. There was an edge of urgency in his voice that made me understand. James wasn't just planning a family trip. He was trying to leave them something. A legacy of presence and connection and aliveness. When were you thinking? July. Give everyone time to prepare. Give Natalie time to come around to the idea. I'll help you plan it. Over the next 4 months, I watched James throw himself into preparation with the same methodical dedication he'd applied to everything. He researched routes, practiced his navigation skills, even took a wilderness first aid course. But more than that, he worked on his family. He sent weekly emails to all three children, sharing stories from his adventures, photos of wild places, reflections on what he was learning. He had video calls with his grandson, showing him maps and pictures, getting him excited about the trip. He and Catherine started a family group chat, previously non-existent, where they shared hiking tips, gear recommendations, and encouragement. Slowly, family began to shift. Michael posted photos from solo hikes. Katie bought hiking boots. Even Natalie the skeptic, Natalie the perpetually busy lawyer, began asking questions about what to pack. When July finally arrived and the whole family gathered at the trailhead, I barely recognized them as the disconnected group James had described. They were nervous but excited, teasing each other, helping with each other's packs. 6-year-old Oliver, James's grandson, was practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "Are we going to see eagles, Grandad? We might, if we're lucky. And sleep in tents? Every night. And cook on a fire. On a camp stove, but yes. This is the best day ever." James caught my eye or Oliver's head, and I saw tears there. Happy tears. The first day was chaos, as all multi-generational trips are. Too many people with different fitness levels, different expectations, different needs. Michael's partner twisted her ankle on a tree root. Katie struggled with the pace, stopping frequently to catch her breath. Natalie kept checking her phone, though there was no signal. But by evening, when we'd made camp and cooked dinner together, something magical happened. As darkness fell and we gathered around our small stove, no campfires permitted, the family began to talk. Real talk, not the superficial catching up of holiday dinners, but genuine sharing. Michael spoke about his struggles at work, the pressure he felt to perform, the fear that he was becoming as absent for his own children as James had been for him. "I don't want to repeat that pattern," he said, looking at his father. "I want to break it. That's why this trip matters to me." James nodded slowly. "I'm sorry. For being absent. For prioritizing work over presence. I thought I was doing the right thing, providing for you all. But I missed so much." "You're here now," Michael said. "That's what matters." Katie spoke about her divorce 2 years earlier, how lost she'd felt, how she'd thrown herself into work and busyness to avoid dealing with the pain. "When you sent those emails, Dad, about rediscovering yourself, it made me realize I'd never really discovered myself in the first place. I went from university to marriage to career without ever asking what I actually wanted." "What do you want?" Catherine asked gently. "I don't know yet. But I think I need to find out." Even Natalie softened as the evening went on. She spoke about her move to Australia, how exciting but lonely it had been, how she'd been desperate to prove she could succeed on her own, but secretly terrified she'd made a terrible mistake. "I've been angry with you," she admitted to James. "Angry that you got to have this great adventure, this rediscovery, while I'm stuck on the other side of the world feeling like I'm failing at everything." "You're not failing," James said firmly. "You're incredibly brave. Much braver than I was at your age. You took a risk, moved halfway around the world, started a new life. That takes courage I never had. But you're here now, having adventures, while you're building a life. That's its own adventure. And it doesn't mean you can't have this too." He gestured at the landscape around them. "Australia has wilderness, Natalie. Mountains, deserts, rainforests. You could explore them. Find your own version of what I've found. Maybe." She was quiet for a moment. "I've missed you. All of you. I didn't realize how much until right now." Oliver, who'd been listening with the serious attention of children, spoke up. "Are you sad, Auntie Natalie?" "A little bit, sweetheart. Granddad says when you're sad, you should look at something beautiful. Want to look at the stars with me?" Natalie's face crumpled, and she pulled Oliver into a hug. "I would love that." I watched this family healing itself in the wilderness and understood why James had been so insistent on this trip. These weren't just conversations they could have had around a dinner table. There was something about being in wild places, away from distractions, that allowed real honesty. Over the next 6 days, I watched the Hartley family transform. The children remembered how to play. At one point, I found all three of them engaged in a fierce debate about which route to take, poring over the map together like they were kids planning a treasure hunt. Partners opened up about their own fears and dreams. Catherine painted, creating quick watercolor sketches that captured moments. Oliver examining a beetle, James helping Katie across a stream, Natalie and Michael laughing at some private joke. But the most remarkable transformation was in James himself. He'd been confident on his solo trips, capable and strong. But with his family, he became something more. A teacher, a guide, a storyteller. He taught Oliver how to identify animal tracks. He helped Katie overcome her fear of heights on a particularly exposed section of trail. He sat with Natalie one evening and talked about failure and courage and the difference between running away and running toward. On the fourth night, after everyone else had gone to bed, James and Catherine and I sat by our camp stove, drinking tea and watching the stars. "Thank you," James said quietly, "for making this possible. For believing in an old fool who'd forgotten how to live." "You're not a fool," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "You're one of the bravest people I've met." "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified, most of the time." "That's what makes you brave." Catherine squeezed his hand. "Do you remember what you said to me on our second date? When I said I was afraid of heights but wanted to climb Arthur's seat anyway?" "Not word for word. You said, 'Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that something else matters more than the fear.' I fell in love with you in that moment." She looked at him tenderly. "You've been living that philosophy these past months. Deciding that aliveness matters more than safety. That connection matters more than comfort. That love matters more than fear." James was quiet for a long moment. "I wasted so much time." "You didn't waste it," Catherine said firmly. "You lived it. You raised children, built a career, created a life. That wasn't waste. It was just different. And now you're in a different season, living differently. But I missed so much." "Then don't miss any more." She gestured at the tents where their families slept. "They're here, James. Right now. Your children, your grandson, all of them here with you, sharing this experience. Don't waste this moment." Morning moments passed. James nodded slowly, tears tracking down his weathered face. "You're right. You're always right." "Not always. But occasionally I have a point." They smiled at each other in the starlight, and I saw a lifetime of love and partnership in that smile. The trip's crescendo came on the 6th day, when we reached the summit of Ben Macdui, Britain's second highest peak. It was a challenging climb, especially with Oliver, who James carried for the last kilometer on his shoulders. But the entire family made it. Standing on top, with the whole of the highlands spread out below us, the Hartley family held hands in a circle. 3 generations connected, literally and figuratively. James spoke first. "I brought you all here for a reason. Not just to show you beautiful places, though they are beautiful, but to share something I learned these past months. That we're all connected, like that fig tree in Costa Rica, like these mountains to the valleys below. We're a family, and we're strongest when we remember that connection." He looked at each of them in turn. "I'm sorry for the years I wasn't present. For the moments I missed, the conversations I didn't have, the adventures we didn't share. I can't get those back. But I can give you this." He gestured at the landscape. "I can give you this moment, this experience, this memory of us all together in a wild place, choosing to be present with each other." Oliver, still perched on James's shoulders, spoke up with the clarity of children. "I'll remember this forever, Granddad. When I'm old like you, I'll remember standing on top of the world with everyone I love. James's voice was thick with emotion. That's all any of us can ask for, isn't it? To be remembered with love. Natalie stepped forward and hugged her father tightly. Thank you, Dad. For dragging us all out here. For showing us this. For reminding us who we are as a family. I didn't drag you, James protested. You all chose to come. Because you led the way, Michael said. You showed us it was possible to change, to grow, to rediscover joy even after decades of routine. That's a gift. They took photos on the summit. Silly photos, serious photos, candid photos of Oliver pretending to be a mountain goat. But the photo that mattered most was the one Catherine took. James surrounded by his family, all of them looking at him with love and respect and gratitude, the wild landscape stretching out behind them. That evening, the last night of our expedition, the family gathered around the camp stove one final time. But instead of the emotional sharing of previous nights, this was lighter. Stories and laughter, jokes and teasing, the comfortable warmth of people who know and love each other deeply. At one point, Oliver climbed into James's lap and fell asleep there, exhausted from the day's adventure. James held him gently, and I saw him looking down at his grandson with such tenderness, such presence, that I had to look away. Later, after everyone else had gone to bed, James spoke to me one last time. I set out on these adventures thinking I needed to find myself, he said quietly, careful not to wake Oliver, who was still sleeping against his shoulder. But that wasn't what I needed at all. I needed to remember that I was never lost. I just stopped looking. Stopped seeing. Stopped being present. And now? Now I see everything. The beauty in a spider web. The miracle of my grandson's breathing. The way Catherine's hand fits in mine. The love in my children's eyes. It was always there. I just wasn't paying attention. That's your real discovery, I said. Not any particular place or adventure, but learning how to truly see what you have. Yes. He adjusted Oliver's weight gently. And the terrifying part? How easily I almost missed it. If Catherine hadn't pushed me, if I hadn't found that photograph, if I'd let fear keep me comfortable, I could have lived my whole life half asleep. But you didn't. No. I woke up. And I intend to stay awake. Chapter 7. Full Circle. I didn't guide the Hartleys again after that expedition. They didn't need me anymore. They'd found their own way, their own rhythm, their own version of adventure. But we stayed in touch, and over the next year, I watched their lives transform through emails, photos, and occasional video calls. James completed his guide training and started leading trips for people over 60 who'd lost their sense of adventure. His groups were small, intimate, focused as much on emotional rediscovery as physical challenge. Catherine joined him, offering painting workshops in wild places, teaching people to see the landscape through an artist's eyes. Michael left his high-stress job and started working for a non-profit focused on outdoor education for underprivileged youth. He brought his own son on weekend hiking trips, breaking the cycle of absence he'd feared perpetuating. Katie went back to school, studying environmental science, discovering a passion she'd never known existed. She sent me a photo of herself on a solo backpacking trip with a note. Finding myself, 1 mile at a time. A year later, she sent another. A wedding photo from a small ceremony on a mountaintop, marrying a park ranger she'd met during her studies. Natalie stayed in Australia but embraced adventure there. Rock climbing in the Grampians, snorkeling the Great Barrier Reef, camping in the outback. She started a blog about adventure as an antidote to loneliness, which developed a surprising following. And Oliver? Oliver became a tiny adventurer, constantly begging his parents and grandparents for camping trips, collecting rocks and feathers and stories, already planning the mountains he'd climb when he was bigger. But the most remarkable transformation was in James and Catherine's marriage. They'd gone from comfortable strangers to passionate partners, rediscovering not just who they'd been, but who they could become together. They sold their large house and bought a smaller cottage near the Highlands, spending half their time guiding trips and the other half exploring on their own. A year after their family expedition, I received an invitation to join them for a winter climb. Just the three of us, like old times. I met them at their cottage, and immediately noticed the changes. The walls were covered with Catherine's paintings. Vibrant watercolors of mountains and seas and forests. James's gear hung neatly by the door, well used and carefully maintained. Everything spoke of lives fully lived. "You look well," I told them. "We are well," Catherine said simply. "Better than we've been in decades." "Best year of my life," James added. "And I'm 68 years old. How's that for a late start?" That evening, over dinner, they told me about their plans. They wanted to start a foundation offering adventure experiences to people who'd lost their way. People dealing with grief, retirement, divorce, depression. They'd partner with therapists and counselors, using wilderness as a tool for healing and rediscovery. "We know what it's like to wake up one day and realize you've been living someone else's life," James explained. "Or a half version of your own life. We want to help others find their way back to themselves." "That's ambitious," I said. Says the man who helped a 67-year-old rediscover adventure. Catherine teased. "You started this, you know. By believing in him when he barely believed in himself. I just provided the opportunity. James did the hard work." "We all did the hard work," James corrected. "You, me, Catherine, our children. It's been a collective effort of waking up, paying attention, choosing to be present." The next day, we climbed Cairngorm in winter conditions. Cold, windy, challenging. But James moved with confidence now, his skills honed by a year of constant practice. Catherine was slower but determined, pausing frequently to photograph or simply admire the view. On the summit, standing in the wind with the whole of the Highlands visible below, James turned to me with that grin I'd come to know so well. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything. You already thanked me. I'll keep thanking you. Because you gave me my life back. You gave us our life back." He pulled Catherine close, and she leaned into him, perfectly comfortable despite the cold. "I didn't give you anything," I protested. "I was just your guide." "Exactly," Catherine said. "You guided us back to ourselves. To each other. To our family. To this." She gestured at the vast landscape. "How do you thank someone for that?" I didn't have an answer. So instead, I pulled out my flask. Whiskey, like James's had been that first night in Skye. And we toasted. To adventure. To family. To presence. To second chances and late bloomers and people brave enough to admit they'd lost their way. As we descended in the fading light, I thought about all the clients I'd guided over the years. Most were forgettable. Pleasant enough, but transactional. They wanted an experience, I provided it, we parted ways. But every once in a while, someone like James comes along. Someone genuinely searching, genuinely willing to be transformed. Someone who uses adventure not as an escape from life but as a portal back into it. At the bottom of the mountain, James paused and looked back up at the summit we'd just left. "I used to think adventure was about conquering things," he said reflectively. "Mountains, rapids, challenges. But it's not, is it?" "What is it about?" I asked. "It's about surrendering. Surrendering control, surrendering certainty, surrendering the illusion that life can be managed and predicted and kept safe. It's about opening yourself to wonder, to risk, to the possibility that the world is infinitely more beautiful, and terrible, and alive, than you ever imagined." He turned to Catherine, and they shared a smile full of history and hope. "It's about remembering that you're alive," Catherine added softly. "Not just existing, not just going through motions, but truly, completely, wonderfully alive." As I drove away that evening, Leaving them to their cozy cottage and their newly reclaimed life, I realized that James Hartley had taught me as much as I'd taught him. He'd reminded me why I became a guide in the first place. Not to show people mountains or rivers or forests, but to help them find their way back to themselves. 6 months later, I received a package in the mail. Inside was one of Catherine's paintings. A watercolor of 3 figures on a mountain summit, rendered in loose, expressive brushstrokes that captured movement and emotion more than precise detail. On the back, in Catherine's neat handwriting. For our first guide, who showed us the way when we'd forgotten how to see. With love and gratitude, James and Catherine. I hung it on my wall, and it's there still. Every time I look at it, I remember the man who came to my office with a faded photograph and a desperate hope that it wasn't too late to rediscover himself. It wasn't too late. It's never too late. That's the greatest discovery of all. Not a place or a view or an adventure, but the simple truth that we can always choose to wake up, pay attention, and fully inhabit our lives. James Hartley taught me that. A 67-year-old retired engineer who decided that comfort was a kind of death, and chose aliveness instead. Who remembered that love of family, of the world, of life itself, requires presence, attention, and courage. Who proved that it's never too late to come back to life. And that, I think, is the greatest adventure of all. Epilogue. 3 years after that first meeting in my office, I received an email with a photo attachment. It showed James, now 70, graybeard grown long, deeply tanned, standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon. But he wasn't alone. Oliver, now 9, stood beside him, beaming. Behind them, Catherine was setting up an easel. Michael and his wife were unpacking camping gear. Katie and her new partner were studying a trail map. And Natalie had flown in from Australia with her new husband, a fellow adventurer she'd met on one of her solo treks. The whole family, together again, choosing adventure. The email was short. Yearly tradition now. Last year was Patagonia. Next year, maybe Kilimanjaro. Oliver is very keen. We've discovered that adventure is contagious. Once you start truly living, everyone around you catches it. Thank you for helping us remember how. With love, James, Catherine, and the whole awake, alive, adventuring Hartley family. I printed the photo and hung it next to Catherine's painting. A reminder that transformation is possible. That families can heal. That it's never too late to wake up and start truly living. And that sometimes, the greatest discovery isn't something you find in the wilderness. It's realizing that the greatest treasure was at home all along. You just needed to journey far enough away, to see it clearly.